we need to do now is set a static IP address for our adapter. Once we've done that, we'll tell the router to forward any incoming proxy traffic to that address when it arrives. Let's start with a quick detour to check what our current IP address, default gateway, and DNS server are. We want the Start button and then All Programs. From the Accessories category, we'll choose Command Prompt. And at the blinking cursor, we need to type ipconfig /all and hit Enter. The number of lines that go scrolling up the screen will depend on a lot of things, but there are likely several tunnel adapters and other mysterious things in the results you just produced. The lines you are looking for will require using the scroll bar on the right to go up to the top of the list. We're looking for local area connection, or local area connection 2, if that's the one we're setting up at the moment. We want 3 pieces of information here. The IPv4 address, the default gateway, the one with just 4 numbers, and the DNS server, or servers, as the case may be. The DNS servers may show up like it does in the picture here, with just one entry that matches the default gateway address, or there may be one or more addresses that look like real internet addresses, and not starting with 192.168, for example. There's actually a setting in the router that determines if it forwards DNS requests, but that's a bit beyond our scope here. If your IP address and default gateway do not start 192.168, then you're probably not connected to a router. There are other router IP ranges possible, but they're rarely used for home use. Remember, you do not want to set your adapter IP as static like we're doing here unless you're going through a router. And like I mentioned before, I'm not going to cover setting up WIngate to use an adapter where the IP and gateway address can change anytime your ISP decides they want to do that. It's not unworkable by any means, but it's not something I'm going to look at here. Alright, back to the Network Adapters window. Remember that Start, Control Panel, Network and Sharing Center, and then change adapter settings if you closed it. If you right-click on the icon for the adapter we've chosen to set up, we need to choose Properties. In the menu that comes up, you'll see a series of checkboxes for supported services. Personally, I turn off file and printer sharing and client for Microsoft Networks, but that's a bit beyond our scope here. I will recommend turning off IPv6 support, but that too is up to you. What we're really doing here is highlighting Internet Protocol v4 and by clicking on it once, and then clicking the Properties button that's down and to the right. We're going to choose the radio button that says Use the following IP addresses, and that'll automatically select the other one that says Use the following DNS server address in the area below. If these are already selected on your adapter, then someone or some program perhaps has already set up a static IP on this adapter. If this is the case for you, then just jot down the IP address and gateway and move on to the step of putting it into your router. Setting up a static IP simply means plugging in a few of the values that you got from the ipconfig command results into the corresponding boxes here. Just to make sure you've grabbed the right IP address and default gateway values from the results of the ipconfig command, you should double check that the first 3 numbers are the same for both. Those numbers are going to start 192.168.0 or 192.168.1 or maybe even 192.168.10 in the vast majority of cases. The 4th number of the IP address can be anything you like between 2 and 254, but you need to pick one that isn't being used by another computer on your home network. I would suggest just using the IP address you are already assigned by your router as a temporary IP. That's the one you got from the ipconfig command. Just clicking in the subnet mask area will fill in 255.255.255.0, and this will be the correct value unless you've got a very unusual network. The DNS server or servers are just the value or values from the ipconfig command as well. When you're done, click OK and OK again to get back to the local area connection icon. The writing beside the icon may show the adapter is going through a reset. If it sits at identifying for a minute and then goes to unidentified network, you've got a problem and you need to go back in and make sure you've entered things correctly. If necessary, you may want to set obtain IP automatically and obtain DNS automatically again. Then OK and OK, wait for the adapter to reset completely, and then go back to the command prompt and verify the results of the IP config command again. Before you do anything more, make sure we haven't broken the connection. A quick trip to Google with your favorite browser will do that. If you can't pull Google at this point, you want to fix that before going any further. Okay, on to port forwarding your router, so incoming requests to your proxy service will get to the WIngate program. The problem with explaining this is that every router will look slightly different and will put the settings under a slightly different heading. Every router will have a place to do this somewhere, and the trick is just finding the place where they hide it. To get to your router's login screen, just open a web browser and type in the default gateway address you entered in the static IP setup step earlier. And just as a note, this does not mean type it into the Google search box. If you've messed up your browser to the point where you don't have an address bar visible anymore, try F4 in Internet Explorer. At least that should work to make one visible temporarily. The username and password to log into your router may be set to something only you or possibly someone else even knows. If you're still at the factory default values, the name and password will likely be admin and blank, blank and admin, or admin and admin, or at least those are the normal defaults for D-Link, Linksys, and TrendNet routers. If you are willing to completely reset your router, which means wiping out all the forwarding and other settings that are currently set up on there, you can think about using a small pin to push the little reset button on the back of the router. Be aware though that if someone else has put in a bunch of time and effort into setting up your router for you, they're not going to be happy that you wiped out all their work by resetting everything back to the factory defaults. Once you're in, the hunt is on. With my D-Link router, there are actually two places that work equally well. Under the advanced topic, there's virtual server, or there's also port forwarding. If you have a choice, you need to pick one spot to make the entries. It's not going to be necessary to make entries in two different places. With every router, the process is going to be very similar. You want to tell the router that incoming TCP traffic on the port you want to use for your proxy service should be sent to the computer that has the IP address that you just set up as static on your adapter. A really good choice for the port would be 8080. There's no rule really, except that it needs to be a port number that's not already being routed. If you've got a really good reason to pick something else, go ahead. Otherwise, just use 8080. With my D-Link, I find an empty pair of lines, pick a name, which is just for my own use if I ever forget why this entry is here. I enter the external and internal port numbers as 8080, and they'll be the same unless you have some bizarre port mapping goal to accomplish. I pick TCP, put in the static IP address of my adapter, and check the Enable checkbox, then hit the Save Settings button.